Additional hops, which is a flavoring addition, I'm also going to add a kettle coagulant and a yeast nutrient. Put it in there, turn the heat back on, it's going to boil for 15 more minutes. Cut the heat off once again, all together, it's not going to see heat again. I'll take a yield of how much is left after my boil, which is normally about a barrel and a half, 46 gallons is going to boil out in that hour and 15 minutes of time. I'm going to take a gravity sample, which is going to help me determine the alcohol content of this particular beer after fermentation. Then I add the third addition of hops, which is the aroma addition, and I start a whirlpool in here. It just drains from the bottom, comes back up through this pump back here, right back into the brew kettle. This jet in here is angled, so it forms a whirlpool. At the vortex of the whirlpool, all that coagulant agent I put in there is grabbing all those hop flakes and makes a cake at that vortex. I'm going to whirlpool for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to give it a 20-minute rest. That cake's going to firm up a little bit. What that's doing is going to prevent all that coming through as I'm running it through my heat exchanger. It'll clog that up, so that cake is going to prevent that for me. After that 20 minutes, I am ready to go into the fermenter with the beer. And I'm going to back up all the way to the start here. When I start my mash, I'll clean the fermenter. I clean it with a caustic and an acid that resurfaces the inside of that fermenter. And then I sanitize it. When the boil starts, I'll go to one fermenter that's got a dormant yeast in it that I think is going to be compatible with the beer I'm brewing. And I'll pull that yeast off at that time and put it in that clean fermenter. It's going to give it about 2 hours of time to wake up, get used to its new surroundings, and get comfortable with where it's at because it's been sleeping. After the 20-minute rest, I'm ready to go into the fermenter. Once I get all of the work out of the brew kettle into the fermenter, the yeast does its job. The yeast, it just pumps it straight from here. Yeah, it runs through the heat exchanger. That's why that cold water comes into play. Just like a radiator in your car. Cold's on one side, hot's on the other. The heat's exchanged. I can go into the fermenter without killing the yeast. The yeast is a living organism. It lives, it breathes, it multiplies, it eats.
What temperature do you go in there at?
Different beers have different fermentation temperatures. Most of my ales go anywhere in between 68 and 74.
Pretty cool.
Lagers, of course, will go below 68. Okay, got all the beer in the fermenter. The yeast does its job. And what it does, it eats the sugar out of the solution. Its two byproducts from eating that sugar are CO2 and alcohol. The CO2 I run off. You can see over there I got that hose in a bucket of water. It's just coming off the valve like this. That's so there are wild yeast and bacteria in the air. Say if I was, like on tomorrow, if I was off and I had that fermenting open like this, once it stops fermenting, it will stop sucking back in there. It'll pull that yeast out of the air. It could contaminate the beer. So I don't want that to happen. So we keep it in water. CO2 can come out, nothing else can get back up in there. And of course the alcohol stays in the solution. It's going to stay in there for 5 days at the fermentation temperature. Then I'm going to drop it to 50 degrees. I want the yeast to slow down a little bit. Don't want it working so much. These are all glycol controlled. The glycol is a commercial grade antifreeze. Matter of fact, they use it to de-ice planes. There's 3 bands in there that it runs through, so it's going to keep that chilled. I can raise and lower the temperature as I need. 5 more days after the 50-degree drop, I'm going to drop it down to 32 degrees. I want the yeast to stop working. Reason being, the yeast eats all the sugar out of the solution and turn cannibalistic. It will eat itself. And then it's going to put out bad flavors, ruin the beer. So I make sure I bring those temperatures down when I need to. Then it's going to see, another 10 to 11 days after that. If it's a beer that needs to be filtered, I filter it through this machine straight out of the fermenter. I have 2 grades of a filter medium that I use. One's coarse and one's fine. There's a bell that fits on top of these plates. I mix up the filter medium in here and it pumps over on the plates. Now one of these, either or the yeast and this filter medium is positive and negative charge. So if you remember back to physical science, opposites attract and combine. So if I pick up any yeast, it's going to grab it and make it layer out on these plates. So I get a nice bright clean beer. And as I'm filtering this, I filter it into my bright beer tank. And I'll do the same process of cleaning this tank as I do these, except on this one and all of my serving tanks downstairs, I have to purge every bit of liquid out of here. Once it's been cleaned and sanitized, I have to purge all liquid out and then pressurize it with CO2. That's because bacteria needs 3 items to grow. It needs liquid, it needs protein, and it needs oxygen. If I've got all liquid out of there and CO2 in there, there's not going to be any oxygen. Oxygen is a lighter gas than CO2. Any CO2 is going to push that oxygen away. And as I put beer in there, I'm releasing all that pressure. So if there's any oxygen, it's going to be at the top anyway. It's coming out first. And then if I got the CO2 on top of it, it's going to be fine. There's only 2 items that hurt beer. Oxygen, because it allows bacteria growth, and direct sunlight. Sunlight makes bacteria grow that can produce its own oxygen. There's 2 things you don't want in your beer. Okay?
Like Miller stored sometimes.
Yeah. Once I've got all the beer out of the fermenter into the bright beer tank, I'll pressurize the bright beer tank, run a hose from there to one of these transfer lines right here. I've got the same setup downstairs in my tank room. I just run a clean hose from that set of transfer lines to a clean tank down there, run the beer in there, and then force carbonate with CO2 down there, and it's ready to go. The tanks downstairs read tax determination because I have no sight glasses on any vessel up here that's going to hold beer other than this bright beer tank. And this beer might not always go to one tank downstairs. So once I get it down in the tanks down there, sight glasses are down there, I know how much I have in each tank, I can determine the amount of tax that we owe Uncle Sam. That's why they read tax determination down there. After that, it's ready to go. We serve all of our beers from the tanks downstairs, except for what's on the cask, and I fill the firkins when I'm pulling this beer out. Any questions? Did I answer everything? Okay. Oh, that's good.
It's a lot more complicated than one.